Hey everyone, welcome to Decelerator. I'm your host, Rob Kennedy, and today my guest is Donal Greene from Certain. Today I'm talking with Donal Greene, now the head of business development at Certain, a company that does criminal background checks and identity verification for companies around the world. I met Donal a while ago, and this interview was recorded actually a while ago. He's Irish and moved to Slovakia to start an identity company with people who are identity experts from scratch, basically. And it was an impressive and high velocity company that he built. He exited to Certain. And the reason he's on the show is because he's just a really remarkable entrepreneur who moved very quickly, started down a very typical venture path, and took a left turn by basically forcing a larger company to acquire him. Really great guy, really great learnings. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on Donal Greene. Well, thanks, Donal, for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. First of all, where in the world are you when we're having this conversation?
So thanks for having me, Rob. Really glad to be here. I'm currently in Bratislava, Slovakia, right in the heart of Europe. Last week I was in Montreal. Tomorrow I'm going to Ireland, and then the week after in London. So I do get around a little bit.
Well, thank you for landing for 5 minutes to talk to us. We wanted to have you on because your journey is super fascinating, kind of already different than the first couple of episodes we've already done. Kind of want to get a bit of a background on you before we get into what the heck were you doing? Because it's been kind of like a roller coaster rocket ship at the same time, if that's even a thing. So you started your career at a company called Innovatrix. Tell us just a little bit about how that went, or what that is. Like, what is Innovatrix and what did you do?
So Innovatrix is a company based here in Bratislava. They're 20 years old this year. So they started out developing fingerprint algorithms for door scanners, which were very popular back in the mid 2000s. It's a really interesting company. So when I joined it, I actually joined as an external English teacher, helping their local sales team develop their English language skills, presentation skills, and all that kind of stuff. At the time, the company was like 35 people, 3 million of revenue, but they had developed this brand new facial recognition algorithm, which they submitted to the NIST facial recognition benchmark, and it was ranked as the top globally for accuracy and speed. So at that time, a lot of attention sort of came on the company. It got a lot of press globally. A lot of big system integrators around the world were interested in using this algorithm. So they said to me, hey, do you fancy doing a bit of sales for us? Because we're slammed here. You can jump in, learn about the product, and hopefully, help us grow a little bit. So I did sales initially in Europe, while also working with the company on a lot of their branding, a lot of their marketing stuff, product data sheets. And as someone who knew nothing about biometrics, I got kind of like dumped in at the deep end and started to learn very quickly. The sales role then expanded to being Europe, Middle East, Africa. But a lot of our European clients had operations in Asia. So as we got to like 2018, 2019, I was up to like 200 days a year traveling, really working in a wide range of business. So because it's like just pure biometric algorithms, you have use cases in government, law enforcement, election agencies, banks, ride-sharing applications, everywhere. So one day you could be talking, you could travel to Africa and meet a minister in relation to a tender that's coming up. And the next day you could be talking to the chief risk officer of a bank. It was really wide and varied. Really enjoyed it, learned a lot. We managed to grow the company's revenue totally organically without any investors from 3 million to 20 million in just under 4 years.
Crazy.
And we grew the headcount to about 200 from a base of 35. And then as the company started to sort of mature, the growth was kind of like that. And then we plateaued at around 20 million. And that's kind of where it still is today. So I took a role as Chief Experience Officer, which was in a division of the companies. We sort of founded a new division, which was focused on digital identity for financial services and for other types of enterprises. So that's really getting into the area of KYC, account onboarding, customer verification, all that kind of stuff. The CXO role was pretty much sitting between sales, marketing, product, and go-to-market. We grew that division from about 400K to 5 million in 18 months. So it really took off.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, stayed on as a consultant for about 6 months after I founded my own startup. And that's when the Innovatrix journey finished and the Trustmatic one began.
So before we get there, a couple points. One is just for those who may not know, KYC is know your client. Like you have to
Yeah.
do, if you're in financial services, you have to know that theoretically that you're not laundering money, that the
Yes.
person is,
Yes.
and also invest appropriately given the risk portfolio that that person might have. If they're super old, maybe they're not into Bitcoin. Um, but like just one quick step back,
Sure.
you don't have a Slovakian accent.
I
You're
don't.
not from Slovakia.
No, no.
You're from Northern Ireland.
Not Northern Ireland,
It's
Ireland.
normal, old fashioned Ireland.
Old
What's
fashioned, good
old
old
fashioned?
Ireland. Yeah.
Old
Yeah.
fashioned. So you're from Dublin?
Not far from Dublin. It's a small town, about 35,000 people, called Dundalk. It's
Yeah.
exactly on the midpoint between Dublin and Belfast in a beautiful coastal area.
Is that it's still on the not Northern Ireland? It's like literally
It's on the border.
on the it's on the border.
It's on the border, yeah. And if you read up on Dundalk,
Yeah.
during the Troubles, it was quite an interesting place,
Yeah.
being on the border. But yeah, grew up there and then left at 21 to move to Slovakia,
As one does.
as
Were
one does.
you are you well before we get to why, were you growing up during that period of Irish history?
Not really. So I was born in 1990, although I look a
Okay.
lot older.
Yes.
The Troubles like officially ended in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement.
Yes.
But the really sort of dark days would have been from the 70s up until like the late 80s. That was the worst time to be there. My
Yeah.
dad, for example, he worked on the other side of the border in a town called Newry,
Okay.
and he would be subject on a weekly, sometimes daily basis to British Army checkpoints, pulling everyone out of the car, doing searches, holding you up for an hour on your way to work. So it was a little bit, to use a Canadian phrase, gnarly at times. But yeah, when I was growing up, it was very peaceful. There was no trouble at that
Did
point.
my parents are immigrants to Canada, like they came from communism, they escaped communism, so it sort of colors your worldview to an extent. I didn't grow up in communist Europe.
Yeah.
You didn't grow up in what was called the Troubles at the time. Did that affect your family? Like, did that affect how you look at the universe, do you think?
I think like when I was growing up in Ireland, it was really the start of the Celtic Tiger era. So
Mm-hmm.
Ireland went from being the poorest country in Europe by basically all metrics to
Mm-hmm.
being the richest pretty much in the world by about 2007.
Mm-hmm.
So we were in a period of, very fast economic growth. You had Apple, Google, and all the others coming into Ireland, and the economy was really flying. I was from a very working class family, so we weren't, exactly riding on the coattails of the Celtic Tiger, but we were, I guess, comfortable. We had Dundalk is a very working class town.
Mm-hmm.
My life revolved around, well, school because I had to go, and football every other waking hour until my mom brought me in to go to bed, essentially. And when I say football, I mean soccer for North
Yes,
American
yes.
viewers.
Depending on where you're listening to this, it will make
Yes,
sense.
yes.
And so you decided, so you weren't like leaving. Why do you go to Slovakia?
Yeah, good question. So when I was 19 in Ireland, I met my then girlfriend who was from Slovakia.
Mm-hmm.
And within a fairly short space of time, we had a baby together.
Mm-hmm.
Ben, who is now 14, and maybe another story, he actually lives now in Ireland at boarding school in Dundalk, of
Okay.
all places.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ben was born in 2010. My then girlfriend and I, we didn't stay together. So she moved back to Slovakia to be with her family with a small baby, which makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I spent about 6 months going back and forward between Dublin and Bratislava. There's a direct flight, which is great. It takes about 2 hours. But then just decided one day, like, I'm not going to do this on a long-term basis. I packed up the car and drove from Ireland to Slovakia without much of a plan, without much money in the bank, and
Mm-hmm.
started off teaching English here to make ends meet, and then that led into the Innovatrix job coming up, essentially.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting too because given the story you just told, it's like it's cool that you were dropped into the sales role, not necessarily formally trained. Like you didn't come up with
The furthest thing from formally trained.
yes,
Yeah.
but it's clearly something that comes somewhat naturally to you. And then you're like, hey, yo, I won't fly between I won't fly between Dublin and Bratislava, but I will go to Asia and Africa. Like, did you feel like why did you do this crazy traveling? You have a young kid, you know, it's not your company.
Yeah. Yeah.
Why?
Well, look, I mean, I'm a naturally very curious person. So, and it was obviously part of the job, and we were incredibly well paid, and we were making commission and all that kind of stuff. So there were motivations to go and do it.
Right.
The really great thing about doing that is, like in 1 year, in 2019, I visited 54 different countries. I was 200 days on the road, and you learn a lot about how business works in diverse places like Africa, Asia, Middle East, etc.
Hmm.
And the company was excellent. I always was able to take, if I went there from a Wednesday till a Friday, I could take the weekend and go and explore. I actually had a little vlog going for some time on my travels, which got a bit of traction back in
Oh yeah.
2019. So from my perspective, I was seeing the world. I was, it was paid for by a company, not by me. So it seemed like a great thing. And yeah, I mean, there obviously are downsides to it, family, stability, time with kids, all that kind of stuff. And now I've kind of leveled off that. My travel is, under 100 days this year. So that's, pretty good going so far.
uh, what airline do you have status with is really the important question.
That's the thing. So I fly to so many different places that I never get
Oh,
enough with just one airline.
that's brutal.
If I was going Toronto to Vienna, Toronto, I could do Air Canada,
Yeah.
or Austrian Airlines. But I have a bit of status, but I'm not like, Senator or Diamond on anything. So I have to pay for the upgrades if I ever take them, which is rarely, to be fair.
Yeah. Well, then this interview's over because I thought you were cool, but no.
No, no. I mean, you know what? I have very good status with Hilton, so I got Diamond there, and I can
Oh yeah.
park. I can park at the door of any Hilton, and I get free upgrades to the best available room.
Oh nice.
That's as far as it's gotten me in life. It's that's the way to go.
Soon you'll own the hotel. That's cool.
Yeah.
So okay, so you're like, were you entrepreneurial before you switched to the like post Innovatrix era? Were you entrepreneurial leading up to that, or is that just sort of unfolded over time?
Yeah, I was. So the first thing I did, I just finished my high school. I didn't go to university. It wasn't for me. I was actually planning to be a pro soccer player, and
Mm-hmm.
had a decent couple of years playing in Ireland, and went to England to some teams and stuff like that. But it was never going to be a career. I realized that when I was around 20. So my first not real job, my first job was actually knocking on doors selling telephone packages around Dundalk,
Mm-hmm.
which was actually a multi-level marketing scheme in the end. So I got sucked into that. But knocking on doors is the best way to start, I think, in an entrepreneurial journey or in a sales journey. Following on from that, I worked at a great company in Dundalk, Optimum Results, essentially as a telesalesperson. So picking up the phone, doing 60 calls a day,
Ouch.
selling training courses. And then actually before that, when I was 17, with a friend of mine, we started events promotion business. I mean, I call it a business. We weren't registered or anything. We just sort of went and did stuff. So we managed a girl band for a period of time, and we brought, anyone in the UK will know JLS. They were one of the X Factor finalists from years and years ago. We
Yes.
brought them to a tiny nightclub in a place called RD in rural Ireland. Made no money from it, probably lost money in it, but we had some attempts at being entrepreneurs.
Okay.
We did some weird stuff like buying like 500 cases of lavender sticks for incense and that kind of stuff. And so yeah, there was always like the mentality there, or the mindset of trying to be an entrepreneur, but it didn't really, could never have called myself an entrepreneur up until the time I left Innovatrix, essentially.
So what it was, the company was called, well, I mean, you wrote Ventures. Is that what it was? Like, what was the next step?
So during COVID, one spends a lot of time alone in an apartment. At the time, I was even single. I wasn't with my current wife, and did a lot of thinking, and decided pretty much at the same time that I would found Trustmatic, but
Hmm.
also with a friend from Uganda who lives in Slovakia. We wanted to do a sort of a social enterprise called
Hmm.
Eroda.
Hmm.
So literally at the same time, within a month of each other, I founded Trustmatic, and also with a friend founded this Ugandan ginger farm, which is what it is today.
That's cool. As one does. So you founded a ginger farm.
Yeah,
Did that require a ton of capital, or was that just like you had the right
yeah.
humans? And
it required more capital than I probably banked on.
Right.
So I put a lot of my own resources into it, and then brought in a couple of investors for phase two.
Okay.
So how that worked was we went to Uganda one day during COVID, so got all of the passes and doctor certificates and all of that. Went to Uganda with Martin, my business partner there.
Hmm.
Looked at a couple of plots of land, ended up buying 13 acres outside Kampala. And then, so the 13 acres was essentially jungle. So it was like thick
Wow.
bush and all of that sort of stuff. So we spent about 6 months, leveling it, removing all of the bush. There's like all technicalities when you want to do farming, which is like you've got to put coffee husks all over the land in order to get the pH of the soil right. So all that sort of stuff took about 6 months and a lot more money than we thought. And then we finally got our first bit of ginger in towards the end of that first year. And since then, it's kind of been going. It's not intended to be a profit-driven enterprise.
Hmm.
We really work closely with the local community in the area who live in, extreme poverty, to be frank.
Hmm.
We've done some nice things for them in terms of putting in a permanent clean source of drinking water, biogas toilets, providing solar panels for the huts that they live in
Cool.
so they can charge their phones, and doing some initiatives around malaria, which is a huge killer of people, and including babies, unfortunately, there.
Yeah, yeah. And sorry, just like why ginger? Is there something optimal about ginger there?
Because of COVID, actually.
Okay.
Ginger is a crop that it takes about 7 months to get to maturity, but you can leave it in the ground for 18 months after it reaches maturity. You don't have to harvest it.
Mm.
And our thinking was, the route out of Uganda goes through places like Rwanda or into Mombasa in Kenya. And with COVID and the uncertainty around it, we weren't sure if we'd be able to run trucks, right? So we wanted something that we could leave until the time was right and then harvest and export.
That's really cool. And then does it stay within Africa, the African region, or does it get exported like
Yeah,
overseas?
so like we had grand visions at the beginning that we'd be exporting to Europe. We learned very quickly that China more or less owns the global ginger market.
Okay.
So what we produce today goes to local markets in Kampala, and some of it would end up as far as Rwanda or parts of Kenya. Yeah.
So you're still big ginger for parts of Africa.
We're big ginger. We've also diversified away from ginger
Ooh.
now that we don't need to leave things in the soil for unspecified periods of time. So we do a bit of melons, peppers, avocados, and all that sort of stuff. And we've got a couple of pigs as well.
Wow, full on
Yeah.
farm. Are you employing the local folks to harvest, and is that how it works? Or
Seasonally, yes. So
yeah,
so like we do a couple of harvests a year. We'd bring in, it's usually the local ladies whose husbands would be at work during the day. We bring them
Mhm.
in for a couple of days, and they help us plant seeds or harvest. And then we have, I think it's currently 5 young guys on site who live there. So we
Oh,
built a
cool.
little house, and they live in there, and they're responsible for the day to day, watering, believe it or not, chasing off animals who come in to steal our crops, and basically managing the thing on a day-to-day basis.
That's really cool. And then in the exact opposite direction, Trustmatic. What
Yes.
was the etymology? What did Trustmatic do, and what was the etymology like? How did you end up forming that?
So Trustmatic is very closely related to what I was doing at Innovatrix. That word again, KYC, know your customer. Having launched that product with Innovatrix and seen around about 2017, 2018, a lot of, and by a lot, I mean hundreds of identity verification or KYC companies, startups emerging in the market, raising in some cases $200-400 million in venture funding.
Yeah.
Me being quite, interested in that field and testing all of those technologies, I really identified a clear gap in that the technologies that were out there, first of all, drove really poor user experience, which means abandonment for customers,
Hmm.
and more importantly, were super easy to defraud
Mm.
using fake IDs, masks, deep fake injection attacks, and those kind of things. So we tried to put together as an MVP with Trustmatic an identity verification tool, which would allow a person to scan their ID and take a selfie in under 20 seconds with 0 clicks, so solving the user experience part,
Hmm.
and was highly resistant to the most sophisticated fraud methods out there. So it took us about 18 months to actually release an MVP. Made so many mistakes along the way, had a team in place, then had a different team in place, burned a lot of cash, but we got it out. in around about 2021 was our first year on the market.
Don't go too far ahead of that. Just take
Okay.
a quick step back. So a couple things. One is I remember there's a fintech conference that happens in Vegas every year called Money 2020. And I
Yep.
remember, I think I was in there at one of the conferences. And I remember there was the year of identity and KYC. And
Yep.
like every damn startup around that ringed around that conference was KYC, AML, ID companies. And what I found fascinating was I don't remember. It was, let's say it was 2017. 2018, nothing.
Yep.
Totally different thing. Totally different. It's like, cats, Bitcoin for cats. I don't remember what it was.
Yeah.
But it kind of showed up one year and completely disappeared the next. Was it because they were all basically shit and they didn't actually work? Or were they like, what, do you have any sense of why that was?
I think yes and no. I mean, it could also be around the themes of the event. Every year I've been at Money 2020 myself, and they
Yeah,
have specific themes.
fair.
I think if you had have been there in 2022, you would have seen the second wave of companies in that space. So in 2022, more than $4 billion US was invested into identity verification companies.
Wow.
Now, we are going through a period of consolidation, including Trustmatic. A lot of those technologies, when you have an IDV company and you're innovative in the early stages, and then you raise $100 million from investors, your focus stops being on quality of the product and more on revenue at all costs.
Yes.
And I think the buyers in the market are more getting wise to things like quality, speed, accuracy.
Mm-hmm.
And those companies who no longer have the capital to reinvest in their product are falling victim of that.
Is there like because we're kind of, I don't want to say we're quite past the move fast and break things, because ChatGPT is sort of doing that to an extent, but like societally, like the Uber, Airbnb, Facebook kind of approach, we're a decade on from that. Do you think that, you're talking about wiser customers? They're like, listen, dude, this is, and it's not just like ride sharing, not that that's trivial, but this is like your money. So do you
It's
think
your
that
money. It's consumer finance, right? So it's
exactly?
payday loans, $500, $1,000 here and there.
So you can't move fast and break a bank.
Well, yeah, and a lot of people in that space tried to do that. So if you look at, like, let's say the top 10 companies in identity verification around about 2022, you probably had like more or less the same group of core suppliers of algorithms, or the same group of open source facial recognition algorithms. So they were all the same stuff with different packaging, with the same problems.
Right. And so the couple interesting questions about the etymology again of the company. You were selling at the previous company. You were not a technologist per se. You saw the opportunity. Where did you find the humans to do this? If you're trying to be innovative, where were the humans?
So I'm definitely not technical, but I would be fairly technical in the area of biometrics and computer vision, not in the level of coding, but on the product level.
Sure.
And I did work a lot with product in Innovatrix. So I had, the building blocks of that, but of course you need people who can turn ideas into code. So I actually got a team of 3 guys based out of Riga in Latvia, who I'd known from the identity industry, who had been in that space for, in one case, 20 years. And they joined as technical co-founders. They were the second technical team we had, which is, quite common not the second at the same time. So we had one and then we replaced it with a second one.
Yeah.
That's quite common in startup journeys, as I've learned. And then, once those guys got on board, they basically knew what they were doing. We got an MVP stood up pretty quickly.
So, it's again, like the beginning of the journey is interesting, because I think like you've become quite successful as a result of that business, but the sausage making piece is the interesting piece, especially if you're an entrepreneur and you're like figuring it out in retrospect.
Yeah.
It's like, and then this happened. Was it like, did you find these co-founders because you're like, I need technical, the original ones were like, I just need technical people who are smart, or they were like, was it a culture fit that sort of broke you up?
Yeah. So the original people were people I knew and I'd worked
Okay.
with, but who necessarily weren't specialists in biometrics and identity.
Right.
And I think that's actually what set us apart from our competitors once we got to market, is that you can hire a really clever team of 20 developers to go and do something. But if they haven't had, 10 or 15 years experience in biometrics specifically,
Yes.
they won't have the same impact, because biometrics is kind of a mix between developing or engineering, but also there's a science aspect to it and a bit of an art of actually understanding what you're seeing and playing with thresholds and dependencies and all that kind of stuff.
Right. So you're like, hey guys and gals, cool. I need something sharper. It's not just a matter of getting code to market. Expertise matters here
Yes.
to make a differentiated product.
Yeah.
Did you break up with them? Like, did you both like look at each other and you're like, hey, this is not the right thing? Or were they like working another job and they're just like side hustling? Or
You mean the first team?
yeah,
Yeah. So yeah, that's one of the difficult things in being a startup founder, and maybe one of the mistakes you make is that you tend to work with people who are friends.
yes,
And then when things don't go well, that can impact those friendships, and that
yes,
happened.
yes,
Um, Mistakes on my side, absolutely. Being a
yeah,
very naive first-time founder, expecting that you click fingers and things get delivered, not understanding tech at the level of detail I would have needed to. But basically, the whole thing just took too long. We weren't making any progress, and we decided to part ways relatively amicably. But definitely, any existing friendships would have been
yeah.
damaged by that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's super common. I think
Yeah.
that's a very common pattern too. Did you raise any money at that point, or you were just like, I'm gonna?
No, we didn't raise initially. We had, like, let's call it friends and family, so about 100K just to allow us to buy licenses and machines and that kind of stuff. We got that together when the second team came on board. We then went ahead and built our MVP relatively quickly. Probably about 6 months after the guys come on board, we released something,
Mhm.
and then I was just selling, right? So reaching out to people who I thought were our ICP and presenting a value proposition, got some initial traction up to about the 10K a month MRR level.
Mhm.
And then we decided to go and raise money, which was, probably the most challenging part of being a founder, especially a first-time founder with no credibility in the startup world, is going out and raising money. And we got, there's a lot of stories around that I could tell you. So
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But
yeah.
why? Okay, so from a sort of product market fit perspective, how did you know? Because how did you know what the actual problem was? Like, how do you know what the MVP was to build?
Yeah.
To then, is it because you were because of your previous experience, or
Yeah.
like, yeah,
Yeah, definitely from previous experience. So I'd been working with customers all over the world. Once we, founded that digital identity unit back at Innovatrix,
hmm
working with customers who were pretty much early adopters in this space. So one example would be a consumer finance company in the Philippines,
hmm
onboarding or verifying 20 million users a year, like sitting for 2 weeks at a time with their team in Manila, going through all the challenges they have, understanding where our product is falling short versus what their expectations and requirements are, and kind of just having all that in your head and going through that 10 times a year. You get an idea for what you can build to have product parity with what's out there in the market, but then what you can do to give you that 20-30% advantage in terms of USPs.
And how did you know? I mean, you're like, here's a new thing that nobody else is doing. How did you know what that was and that you could do it?
So yeah, we weren't doing something that was new and that nobody else was doing. We were
Okay.
doing something that we wanted to be like, the usual is if it's 10x better or 10x cheaper, people that buy it from you.
Yes.
That was kind of our idea. We could deliver it at certainly not 10x, cheaper. We never wanted to be differentiated on price, but we could
hmm
deliver
hmm
because of how we built it at a lower price point than our competitors.
hmm
And across metrics like automation rate, fraud detection, speed, all those kind of things, we really were around about the 10x better mark with the MVP.
And how did you know you could do that?
Um, I would say experience from
Okay.
being, I spent 7 years at Innovatrix, so seven
Yeah.
years deep down in the fundamentals of biometrics.
Yes.
Whereas our competitors were building, a lot of them would come from fintech backgrounds. Very few of them came from the identity or biometrics industry. I kind of knew what was inside their technology in terms of like core libraries and algorithms. And I
hmm
knew that there were better options out there for us to integrate and better ways to do things. So, there was that. And there's also just like a huge amount of blind faith, which in the end turned out to be, a pretty good guess, but equally it could have been totally off and I could have wasted, 2 years of building
Totally.
something that was equal or worse than what was already on the market.
So in your case, it was kind of like, hey, um, I'm a subject matter expert in this space. I understand the problems. I understand the customer pains, and I kind of know what's in the art of the possible. I know what good looks like. I know what bad looks like.
Exactly. Yeah.
Uh, and so was it like you set out, you're like, here's the requirements of what the MVP is based on my experience. Let's build that. It was
Yeah.
as quote unquote simple as that?
We built a really simple MVP. So the MVP did what all of our competitors did: scans your
Okay.
ID and takes a selfie, right? But it does it
Yes.
way faster with 0 clicks for the user.
Mm.
And if you're using a fake ID or this mask that I use all the time for demos,
That's creepy.
or yes, or deep fake injection attacks, like we will be way more accurate at detecting that than what's currently on the market, and we can prove that really quickly.
Got it. So it's funny because a lot of people use the term MVP and they actually are like, I'm going to build the whole damn thing. I'm like, well, that's not the MVP. So I
Yes.
think what you're saying is this is almost like a technology proof of concept MVP kind of thing.
Yeah. So again, first time founder mistakes. We did not build an MVP. We built a fairly complex system.
Okay.
We could have started like going back, right? Looking backwards, we could have started with let's just solve the problem to strip it really down to bare basics of like capturing identity documents in the highest quality possible. That could have been our starting point.
Mm-hmm.
In that case, we could have, got something out in 8 to 10 weeks and started selling that, which
Right.
is what we probably should have done that. Like looking
Yes.
back, we probably should have, but we took probably 18 months from start to finish, 6 months with the second team to
Mm-hmm.
get something out. And that's a lesson as a founder that
And
next
was that
time you,
because you're like, you knew the space almost too well and you're like, this is what they want, this is the whole thing, and so we should
yes,
offer the whole thing?
yes. We could have had that like individual component, which we could have gone to market with and sold to our, future competitors once we had built the entire thing,
Mm-hmm.
which probably would have gotten us better traction earlier on. But yeah, I did have a decent understanding of the problem, a good understanding of how to solve it and with what components and what that had to look like. As you said, what does good look like? So we did spend a lot more time and a lot more money in building the MVP. So it wasn't really a MVP; it was a very viable product, let's say. Yeah. So, but looking back, like advice to any founders is like strip it down to what's absolutely necessary and release that and get somebody paying for it.
Right. And then Chris is texting me saying, is it the minimum desirable product?
Yes. Well, in certain, we'll get to that. We say MLP, minimum lovable product.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's get the distinction there is between MVP and NLP.
I mean, something that's viable is viable, but it's
Yeah.
not like it's not going to make
Doesn't do
anyone,
anything.
jump up and down about it.
Yeah.
MLP has that element of customer delight that we actually love this product. It's sticky, right? We're not going to
Right.
churn off it. We're going to pay good money to use it. That's the difference.
Right. Yeah. And the interesting thing is like, I think that you could argue it solves a different problem. Like the MVP is almost like solving the activation problem, whereas as I think you defined it, the MLP sounds like it's a retention further down the funnel kind of thing.
Yeah.
Of course, everyone wants to get right to revenue,
Yeah.
but the first thing is like, can you get people to pay attention to what you're working on?
I think it's like paying attention. You can get people to sign up, to beta versions and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
Like I've been involved now with some VCs here, and I listen to founders, relatively often talking about how many, free signups they have.
Mm-hmm.
But VCs don't care about that. They want to know
Right.
that is somebody willing to pay something to use your product.
Yes. Yes. But, you know, I think the problem, at least I've seen with founders, is that typically they're so focused on revenue. It's like, cool, have you done step one? Like free
Yeah.
is good. It's not a, investable company, nor is it or bootstrappable company yet. Just because it's done for free, it's not a thing yet.
Yes.
You need to sort of slowly work your way down the funnel to make it a viable business. Yeah, so I think like I'm being intentionally annoying about parsing
Yeah.
where the thing is, and the humans that the second set of tech founders that you actually recruited and worked with, they had special skills. Yeah, they weren't just schmucks from the street. What
No.
were their skill sets?
So they had worked in identity systems integration in government use cases all across the world for in one case 20 years, in one case just over 10 years. They had experience in things like PKI, public key infrastructure.
Hmm.
They had built versions of this for different use cases in the past. They came with elements of the playbook.
Hmm.
They didn't need to spend, months of time ramping and looking at various documentation and evaluating what the components of the solution would be. They kind of hit the ground running and were able to go.
Hmm.
And that's a fairly rare skill set because the identity industry, it's not huge, right? And there's not
Hmm.
a huge amount of people with a massive breadth and depth of experience in it. So we were lucky to find those guys.
How did you find them?
So I had worked with them previously on some projects
Okay.
through Innovatrix.
Hmm.
Knew them. They initially took it on as a side gig with equity only,
Hmm.
which again is a tough sell when you're saying we'll give you X% of something that has no value.
Right.
But those guys are still with us today. They've joined Certain now, and they're pretty. In the end, it turned out to be a good bet for them.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, especially like in the 2020s when everyone's
Yeah,
like, I just need a technical co-founder. And you're like, sure you do. Sure you're going to make it happen. Everyone says that. And
yeah.
then it's like, no, it's
Ideas are 10 a penny. It's all about the execution, right?
100%, 100%. So did you find that um, one just quick side question here, like, were any of them involved in the digital identity space in a government, like setting that up with the government
They would have
in
been, yeah,
Europe?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah,
So
yeah.
that's a really like not only is it a rare skill set, but your timing is interesting because it, the digital ID stuff is only like 15, 20 years old in a
Yeah,
country at a country level, at a national level.
yeah, yeah.
So
So
you got to benefit
yeah,
from
like
that.
a lot of their experience would have been in places like Africa, where
Mm.
there are going back as far as like 2012, 13, 14. There have been World Bank sponsored digital identity or financial inclusion programs.
Mm-hmm.
Example, I don't know what the exact year is, but it's probably touching on 7 or 8 years ago now. Like in Malawi, MasterCard sponsored or participated in a program for a new digital identity there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, an identity card with a digital aspect to it, which was
Mm-hmm.
one document, which is your payment card, your identity card, your driving license, your social security, everything. So
Right.
actually in Africa from the late 2000s onwards, there were digital identity programs running, funded and successful that parts of Europe and North America are only starting to think about now.
Yeah, yeah. I feel like it's the last to join will be the Americans because they're just like, don't don't tread on me.
Yeah. Yeah.
What and so you were at that point, were you bootstrapped?
We were bootstrapped up until about 10K MRR. Yeah.
Right. Other than the angels and friends and family
We
kind of
had
like got it,
a little bit of
obviously.
money from angels, and then that went pretty quickly on technical stuff, on AWS credits, on all the usual stuff.
Yes.
And then we bootstrapped to kind of go to market for the first year, and then we raised some money from local. One US based angel, and then some local, one local venture capital company.
And like, why did you decide to do that then? Obviously, you're out of money. That's the obvious answer.
Simple as that. Yeah, I
Simple
mean,
as that.
we were out of money. We had technically we were cash flow positive because nobody was taking a salary and we were making 10K a month
Right.
with a decent gross margin. But I mean, to scale the thing, to hire people in sales and marketing, to bring in an extra developer, to compete against companies who had raised, in some cases, $200 million and were our direct competitors. Like, you need to raise a little bit, you need to get your foot on the ladder.
Yeah.
Retrospectively, I'm not sure I'd do that again. I'd probably have a different strategy in
Okay.
terms of bootstrapping.
Okay.
But at that point, it was really the only option we saw available to us.
Sure. So let's unpack that in two directions. One is, you like, I've heard companies say we're raising venture because our competitors are raising venture, which is perfectly reasonable. Look, if they're moving fast and they're using money as a weapon, it's kind of hard to not also use money as a weapon. But then, if somebody's raising 100 million or 200 million, that's like
Yeah.
proper moonshot power law style venture.
Yeah.
So you're like raising a million or whatever the number is a drop in the bucket unless you planned on going down that path. No?
Yeah, yeah. That was so. It was actually a million we planned to raise.
Okay.
It was pre-seed. It was for getting a couple of people in, for investing in some very basic things in terms of marketing and sales strategy,
Hmm.
for doing a go-to-market. But we knew that we would have to fast follow, and by fast I mean like start raising again within 6 months of closing the first one.
Hmm.
And then you fall into, I'd say fall into as if it's negative, but you're in the VC game at that point,
Yes.
and you're forced to raise 5 million next time, 15, and then the story, Rob. You've been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're in that cycle, right?
Yeah. And so, uh, did you think that was aside from, like I think earlier on, especially at pre-seed, you have optionality. You do own
Yeah.
enough of the company. I don't know what you've promised your, maybe not the angels, but certainly the venture capitalists. You do have agency over whether you continue to do that path.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but had you sort of made your mind up at that point, you're like, no, this is that kind of machine.
Oh yeah, at that point, like I was fully bought into it. I'd long left my full time job. I pretty much drained a lot of my personal resources, or most of them. So I had personal debt to run elements of the business before we raised money. So yeah, I mean, the only option was to engage with the VC community and put together a proposition and go fundraising, which we did. Yeah.
No, but I meant like, so you raise a pre-seed from an angel and a VC. Cool. You
Yeah.
still could not, right? You could have
Right.
stopped at it, maybe a seed, maybe not a Series A, obviously, but
Yeah. Oh
you could have
yeah.
maybe raised a seed, right? Like were you like, the only way to be successful in this particular kind of business was to do the home run style game?
Yeah. I think at that point my thinking was, and to some extent it kind of still is today, is that identity is a winner takes most market.
Right.
Now, we haven't seen evidence of that in the reality yet, because you still have a hugely fragmented global market with
Hmm.
local, regional, and then a handful of international players. But I think that as we move into reusable identity and what identity actually means in the next iteration, we will have a small number of dominant players, and this was our shot to get there. That was what our pitch deck said. That
Yeah.
was why we were raising, a 1 million pre-seed initially, which is very big in this region of the world,
Hmm.
small in your region of the world.
Well,
But
maybe not
yeah,
Canada.
we had perhaps naively a plan to really go through cycles of series of raising and to become serious competitors and players in that space.
And I want to get to the other half of your point in just a second, but when you're um, Irish guy in Slovakia and you're like,
Yeah,
yo, American,
yeah.
uh, and first time, like, fundraising entrepreneur, I think was it still in the heady days when there was money, or was this in the,
Yeah, just at the end of it. Just at
just at
the
the end
end
of
of
it?
it,
Okay.
actually. So this would be 2022, the beginning of
Okay.
the year. We actually participated in an accelerator program here in Bratislava called Perry Talents,
Hmm.
and I hadn't really made the decision to be raising just at that point.
Hmm.
But one of the mentors on the program, who's now a very good friend of mine, is a guy called Bob Lesko. Has a
Hmm.
outstanding track record in business and also as an investor in the likes
Hmm.
of Uber, Airbnb, etc., like in very early stages. He was a mentor, and one of our tasks was to put together like a theoretical pitch deck. So I had this deck together, very rough and ready, presented it to Bob on a call. And at the end of it was like, yeah, we're raising a million, minimum checks 100K, essentially doing a dummy dry run of what a fundraise might look like.
Hmm.
And Bob's like at the end of it, he's like, that was cool. I'm in for 100K. Raise the rest, and it's done. I'll wire the money when you can show me if the rest of it raised. So that kind of like removed any optionality around it. And yeah, with Bob's help, actually, we went and spoke to some institutional investors. And there's a good story around this, which is a cautionary tale. We had a 1 million term sheet signed with Bob plus two European investors.
Hmm.
And 2 days before Christmas, one of those investors backed out. So I thought my round was gone to pieces. We ended up rescuing it and actually just raising 600,000.
Hmm.
But those were probably the darkest days of being a founder, was when you're up here having raised, you think you've raised $1 million.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as I said, 2 days before Christmas, you're making phone calls to try and convince the other investors to stay on the round.
Yeah,
You don't
yeah,
have
yeah.
time to replace that investor, because that's, it's a 3-month process to get a VC on board,
Yes.
right? So that was a very challenging time.
And was it like it was a verbal yes, and then they changed their mind when it came right down to it, or?
It was a signed term sheet, not a
Okay.
verbal yes, a signed term sheet. I'd been to see them. They're based in the CE region. I'd met their investment committee. I'd done what I thought was a really good pitch. They called me when I was in the car on the way back to say they were in. We got the term sheet together pretty quickly. Everybody signed it.
Hmm.
And then they said that their analysts did a bit of further digging on the identity space and our, claimed competitive advantages and, where the industry was going. And they felt that they had different opinions than I had as to our ability to compete in it. And they said, look, unfortunately, we're out.
Right. And they waited to Christmas Day to tell you that.
Well, 2 days before, which
I'm
was
just
very nice of
joking.
them.
I'm just
Yeah.
joking. It's more fun to say it's Christmas Day.
Yeah.
Did you? And it was interesting. This was your pre-seed.
This was pre-seed, yeah.
So why were you targeting institutional
Well,
at the pre-seed level?
Really good question. So in Slovakia and in other parts of Central Europe, you have the European Investment Fund, which is a European Union fund, which the EU gives or sort of tenders to local VCs to administer.
Yes.
And that fund was coming to the end of its cycle. So there was cash available locally from, call them institutional investors. I mean, they're not,
right.
The assets under management would be quite low compared to like true institutional investors. But because we could tap into that, we needed private money to match part of what the institutional investor was offering. So that was kind of the makeup of that round.
And this was like, EU trying to spur innovation.
Exactly. Yeah.
In each country and be like, look, we can create our own cool things. And so they, rather than picking winners, they pick private investors who are supposed to be experts at being able to pick winners.
Exactly. And Central Eastern Europe is kind of like a development region of Europe.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think in Slovakia, there was a fund of approximately 70 million euros, which was divided among, I believe, 4 or 5 local VCs to administer.
Right. Right.
And of course, there's oversight and all of that. And then it's like a horizon of probably 7 years beyond that.
Okay. Okay. So like in normal world, you wouldn't necessarily have gone to a institutional, but you're like, it's not quite institutional in the traditional sense.
Exactly. Yeah. It was the best move at that particular time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. And then unpacking the other point you said looking back, you would have done it differently. Yeah. What would you have done differently?
I mean, there's an argument there that we could have been quicker and smarter with our go-to-market and actually not raised at all and continued bootstrapping. I think I spent like a month in Palo Alto trying to talk to investors and VCs and go down that route. What I learned there was that like I basically wasted the month because first of all, what we were asking for was like chump change to them. So the round just wasn't big enough or interesting enough. Mm-hmm. And being a Slovakian company, and that's why I actually have another venture, which is like kind of shelved at the moment, but it's registered in Delaware. Being a Slovakian company, like you're going to come to a US angel or perhaps a smaller family office with a 120-page document to do 500K of a round.
Right.
Now, it's going to cost them probably 20K for their lawyers to even have a look at it, right?
Right.
Whereas if you're a Delaware C Corp, you've got standard documentation, less uncertainty around the regulatory environment. It's much easier. So that was a lesson learned. The investor
investment friction, straight up investment friction. Too little money and too much
exactly
uncertainty that they don't need when they can invest in something that is equally uncertain and not have to spend an extra.
And like when I was starting this, I didn't know how to read a term sheet. I didn't know what any of those, legalese terms actually meant. I had to read books and articles on it and upskill myself on it. We didn't have a huge amount of money for lawyers, so it was a lot of, self-learning and all that kind of stuff. So there's that aspect of it. We did so I want to call out, we had that one VC which walked away from the term sheet. The other VC was Neology Ventures here in Bratislava, regulated through Luxembourg, who are awesome. So they backed us even though the other VC pulled out. They followed through, they supported us, and it was really, really good working with them.
but like the hindsight thing is always a weird question to me because it's like, coulda, shoulda, woulda.
Yeah. But as a
Sure,
first
I
time
would have. Yeah.
founder, like it doesn't matter. Like
Yeah.
you learn things from the first journey.
Yes.
You'll probably like 70% of the decisions you make will probably be bad decisions in hindsight. But
Yes.
like
Exactly.
I had no experience in running a business. So you like every first time founder is in a similar position. You make the mistakes and like stats say that 90x% of first time founders fail.
Right.
We got lucky. We were in a good position, but we did have an element of luck as well. And
Hmm.
I'm in the position now where I can look back and and learn from it, but could have gone either way for us.
Yeah, like I think, that 90% always strikes me as a interesting number because it feels like in venture-backed land, that's
Yes.
by design how it's supposed
Yeah.
to work. Whereas if it's not venture-backed land, I don't think it's quite the same failure rate. Not that it's easy to be an entrepreneur and start a tech company
Yeah.
or any company,
Yeah.
but I think the failure rate's a little lower, which is why I think people do entrepreneurial endeavors in the first place. Because not that it's probably, I think it's like 70% failure rate. It's like not
Yeah.
30.
Yeah.
Um, but so you use that cash, you got on that train. And so, by the way, if you were bootstrapping today, like let's say you're building another company today, I know you are, but let's say you're building another company today, would you just create a Delaware Corp, whether or not you would take investment just to sort of hedge that thing, or you're like, nah?
Probably because when it gets to sensitive topics like intellectual property,
Yes,
like you never know if you're going to take VC or not, right? Or
yes,
maybe you do, but it's always the optionality is there.
yes,
Like you don't want to have a company which is 2 years old, 3 years old, 5 years old, which has a huge amount of IP created, which has agreements and all that kind of stuff.
yes.
Then you need to raise venture, and you're sort of big enough to play in the Silicon Valley space.
Hmm.
Like taking all of that IP, unpicking it, and then rehoming it in a US or a Delaware C corp
Hmm.
is extremely expensive and extremely difficult to do. And even if you do it, like having those side agreements and all that kind of stuff, it will scare off VCs. So
Right.
it might. My thinking is that just put it there. It's no harm. It's very easy to administer. There's tools online where you can create a Delaware C corp for $700 in 30 minutes
Hmm.
and just have everything reside there, so that if you need to exercise the option of raising venture, it's painless, or as painless as possible, right?
Right. So you're
Or
saying I
never
shouldn't have
painless, but the
incorporated the
illegal
show.
aspect is
Yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
painless.
I shouldn't have incorporated the show in the Bahamas, is what you're saying. I should have picked Delaware.
They would consider that a red flag.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. Well,
yeah,
that's on point for the show.
yeah.
Um, in terms of and what about M&A? Does that do anything for M&A?
Uh, yeah. So we obviously will get there, but we went through an M&A with,
Yes.
with
Yeah.
Trustmatic. The biggest delay, and we were probably delayed by, in the end, like 8 weeks in getting the signatures, was having. So you've got a Canadian corporation which is
Hmm.
buying a Slovak corporation. So we needed Canadian lawyers, so we had to
Yeah.
contract somebody there. They needed Slovak lawyers. The legal systems are very, very different. I know
Hmm.
that like US to Canada is different, UK to Canada is different, but Slovakia to Canada is very different,
Hmm.
and all in a different language.
Right.
And also the bureaucracy where like directors would have to fly in physically to sign things in front of notaries and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
That's where your delays are coming from.
It's particularly ironic that you run an identity company.
Exactly.
And
Exactly. There's an opportunity for disruption for anyone who's listening. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. And if Donald's not actually one of his 53 side hustles. So tell me, you know, but staying on that point, and we're going to talk the acquisition next. Like
Yeah.
you, like the reason you got the money from those investors was because you're a Slovak company. If you create a Delaware corp, you're not that. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
sure you could play that in a particular way.
Yeah. I think like at the lower end of the scale, like as a bigger fish in a smaller pond in the Bratislava startup scene, which is,
Yes.
very at a very early stage, a developing stage.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, it's easier to get your first million pre-seed with EU assisted money from much more friendly venture capital firms here.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're really doing something which is like YC level, like really has potential to be a proper global technology company,
Yes.
you're probably looking at doing it on a slightly different scale and starting
Right.
with, perhaps double digit million pre-seeds. And then, so the opposite end of that is if I had to continue down the road here in Slovakia, my cap would have worn out because I wouldn't have been able to raise. I might have gotten a 5 million seed out of it, but
Yes.
for Series A, I'm done. Like, there's nobody here writing checks,
Yes.
like not individual VCs writing checks of above 5 million is
Right.
probably like almost unheard of.
Yes, that's true. I think for much of the globe, with very few exceptions.
Yeah.
But so okay, and then the M&A stuff. Going back to the M&A stuff, just quickly, like 8 weeks is long, but it's not the end of the world in terms of like. But you still got acquired.
Yeah.
What would like? Were you an entrepreneur who had just taken some money? You weren't sure if you're going to raise more, but look, at the end of the day, you do want an exit at some point.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether you take capital or not, would you have made it? Would you have still done a Delaware type of animal, like no matter what, even if you're not doing venture, just to make it easier for people to acquire you, or no?
I mean, to invest and to acquire. I wouldn't be thinking of the Delaware like as a like a catalyst or enabler for an M&A transaction as much as I would about having optionality around fundraising.
Got it.
And as you know, like you get a VC who's hot on your deal, you work out the details, and you want them to be able to sign something like the same week, right?
Yes, and not pull out at the last minute.
They blow hot and cold, like, and
Yes.
you need things to move fast, or else the next shiny thing comes along, and you're just some old schmuck over here who's not interesting anymore,
Right. So, okay. So you had raised that money to keep going. And then at some point, was it like certain CERTN for those wondering to Google comes knocking, or like what happens?
So we definitely, we actually only drew down 400,000 of the 600 that was available. And the reason for that is just technicalities around the European money and how it's administered.
Right.
We were not courting M&A. We were planning to draw down the second part of it and then start fundraising pretty soon afterwards for the next round. My sales strategy was very much focused around, like in a nice way, showing customers of our competitors the weaknesses of those competitors and explaining how we can fix that.
Right.
So in the case of Certain, I saw that, they were on the client list of one of our competitors. They were a customer of theirs. I know very well what the particular weaknesses of that competitor are. So as was part of my usual week of prospecting, I recorded a screen recording of how I was able to create an account on one of Certain's products and, exploit a weakness that I saw there, right? Without going into too much detail, that's kind of the long and short.
I'm assuming it's been addressed.
Absolutely. Yes. So essentially showing that they didn't have the best possible product they could have had.
Yes.
Recording it, sending it. I sent it on LinkedIn. So I used LinkedIn Sales Navigator to find out who the CEO of this company in British Columbia called Certain is. Found a guy called Andrew McLeod. Sent him a cold email with a link to the video and a very short elevator pitch. And Andy, as I call him now, because we're very good friends, pinged me back a link to a Google Meet, like with no comment. So I clicked on it, and Andy's behind the screen smiling at me. And he said, "Dude, what's this all about?" Like, well, we, found this little weakness you might have. We're an IDV company. We are a competitor to the vendor you currently use. Maybe it's worth having a conversation about how we could help you, solve this problem. And Andy was like, yeah, why don't we just buy you guys? Like, okay, there was a few other lines of, a few other back and forths between that. But then he just like, we're in the market for an IDV vendor. If you guys are legit, like, come to Victoria, let's have a conversation, and, we can look if we can make a deal together. So I went to Victoria like 2 days later, met Andy and the team at Certain, was made feel extremely welcome and understood it. The deal was one part of it. It was more about the vision we were buying into, like what Certain wants to be in 3, 4, 5 years versus where they are now. And there was so much overlap with what we wanted to build with Trustmatic, but they were in the position of having raised a very significant amount of venture capital, having a global team of 500 people, and being really equipped to be coming back to the fact that this is a winner takes most market to being one of the winners in the market. So uh, go ahead.
No,
Sorry.
no, go ahead. Finish your thought. Sorry.
So yeah, so I mean, apart from like making a deal that made sense for everybody, there was also like, are we on board with the vision of where Andy and the team at Certain are going?
I do find it endlessly entertaining that two pseudo security companies were sending links back and forth and clicking random links and figuring out what's happening.
Yeah,
It's like, don't do any of the things that you just heard.
yeah, yeah,
But how does it feel when somebody's like, "Hey, I want to buy you"? Like I've now subsequently met Andrew, and he's a good guy.
yeah,
He's not
yeah,
like one of those, like, I don't know how to say it, like douchebags or whatever, like the Silicon Valley style, like,
yeah,
or the stereotypical you'd see on the show Silicon Valley kind of
yeah,
person. But it's weird if you call somebody who's like, "I want to buy you." You're like, "Dude, what the hell?" Like,
yeah.
were you like, "Yeah, cute"?
Yeah, I mean, obviously you've only met this person, and it's the first conversation.
Yeah.
And Andrew is like an amazing, unique person, and runs his business in an excellent way. A stated part of Certain strategy is growth through acquisition.
Mm-hmm.
We were actually their fourth for a company that's 7 years old. That's quite
Mm-hmm.
incredible. Um, so yeah, I mean, obviously between that first conversation and me actually going to Victoria a couple of days later, we had a few chats in between,
Sure.
and you go there with a healthy degree of skepticism, but then once we spent a couple of hours together and got into it, they had they were in the market for a company like us, that they had
Mm-hmm.
made a strategic decision that in-housing identity verification and having their own proprietary component for this
Mm-hmm.
was one of their goals. And through the grace of God, I guess, I happened to reach out at the right time and stroke of luck, as I said earlier. And we got down to business and we made the deal happen. Yeah.
And then you, like, I want to just, before we close, I'd like to look in the other direction, like the future
Yeah.
casting. But like, just briefly, what are you doing at Certain now in the end of 2024?
Yeah. So for the last 12 months, I've ran the identity business at Certain. So a lot of that was about, post-merger acquisition, which is the last phase of M&A, which is, also very challenging in some
Mm-hmm.
cases. So integrating Trustmatic's platform into Certain's tech stack, also growing Trustmatic as a revenue generating business on its own, for Certain having an offering in the KYC space.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that, we grew our team by a couple of people. So it's been a good year, really good year. Like
Are you operating kind of separate? Like, is identity separate from the rest? Because, like, look, my experience has been M&A tech acquisitions usually fall apart.
yeah,
Right? Like, I
yeah,
understand that you're not a services company or a product company, but there's still a culture thing, and everyone
yeah.
has theories around how to do this right. But it always ends up being crap.
If you do it right, it still takes 12 months.
Yeah. Okay.
That's what I think. Like from day one, we all became Certanians, which is people who work at
I was
Certain.
wondering what
Yeah,
the adjective noun was. Yeah, that
yeah,
was the other thing. Is it like, do you subsume your culture? I mean, I know you weren't exactly a big company at the time, but like,
yeah.
you basically subsume the culture to the Certain culture. Is that how it works?
Yeah, I mean, we did, and it's gone very well, and everyone loves it. But of course, there are challenges with a Central and Eastern European company going into a West Coast Canadian company, and cultures are obviously different. But
Mm-hmm.
like our team has really enjoyed the last 12 months,
Mm-hmm.
and the culture at Certain is one of the things that makes it special.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really close knit company, even though it's 500 people in 20 odd countries, all working
Right.
remote or mostly working remote. We do have a strong culture, and our team have enjoyed being part of that. And, for people who have worked their whole lives, for example, in Riga or Bratislava, being part of this West Coast Canadian global company now is something really exciting.
Mm-hmm. Is it weird? Like, because the other thing is that, like, on the acquisition side, so there's a cultural side, which seems to have worked out, and I'm sure with intention,
Yeah,
not accidentally. But then there's also the thing that we bought, the identity thing that
yeah,
we bought,
yeah,
and like everyone says these things are strategic, and then they, aren't. Not
yeah,
out of malice, just more out of like, well, there's this other thing, and we have a bigger customer over here. How did they? How did you keep identity? Like, how did you all as a collective keep it as the thing that you wanted it to be? Because
yeah,
it's
yeah.
easily
I
to
know.
get
Yeah,
diluted. Yeah.
totally. So Certain's a tech company which does background screening, right?
Right.
And every background screening, or the vast majority of background screening checks, start with an identity check, right?
Hmm.
So everybody who interacts with Certain, the entry point is the company, which was Trustmatic, right? Or the
Hmm.
solution from Trustmatic. We had like obvious like business KPIs around like what the integration would look like, what the outcomes would be. Those were in terms of automation rate, because every identity verification that doesn't finish automatically with an automatic
Hmm.
decision ends up on the desk of a fulfillment analyst, and that costs money to fill. So we
Hmm.
wanted to have a significant reduction in that, which we've overachieved on. Automation rate, customer experience, and then the fraud detection aspect of it. So, like, without going into too much detail, we did fulfill and actually exceed by quite an amount the internal product integration KPIs. And then there's also the other aspect of Certain now being able to have a proposition in financial services, not just for like employee onboarding, but for customer onboarding. So
Hmm.
that really enhances the offering they have to their existing base, which is 20,000 teams globally, and we've obviously been cross selling to those teams, and also to like what markets they can actually address with their product offering.
So you wove in, that's really cool. And like what's interesting is your career is sort of woven from like not tech to
Yeah,
employed in tech, then to like working for a company. Then you started a company. Now you're back working for a company. And I mean, you have, I'm assuming, an earnout, which is like cash plus options or something like that.
yeah.
Um, he's nodding yes.
I mean,
For the
that's fairly standard. Yeah, I
yeah,
mean, again, I'm whether there's earnouts or not. I one of the reasons for joining Certain was being bought into the vision of the company, right?
yes,
And the vision of the company is being one of those major players in the general trust space,
hmm,
from turning identity verification and background screening into things you do every time you need to access a service. So if you're going to get a job, you do a background check. If you want to
yes,
open a bank account, you do KYC. We
right,
want to turn those things into reusable credentials,
yes,
verifiable credentials that the user owns on their device and can reuse across multiple services. That's very close to the original vision of what Trustmatic was trying to build.
right.
And we feel like we can really achieve this vision by joining Certain, and that was our one of our criteria for going ahead.
Well, that's interesting because it's interesting too because like it is heating up. Like you look at a thing like, sorry to name competitors, but like Stripe Identity
Yeah,
a version of that, trying to be simple. They have some of their own unfair advantages in a different part of the
yeah,
universe, but you like I find that entrepreneurial types are kind of itchy. So yeah, there's earnout, yeah, there's money. Okay, cool, great. But like usually earnouts are a few years at least. And yes, you're passionate about the identity stuff and able to achieve your initial vision. But then there's the itchy entrepreneurial side that
yeah.
inevitably rears its head. Whether that's healthy or not, I don't know. How are you? How are you dealing with like you're now an employee in a big company? Yeah, you're pretty senior,
Yeah.
but you're not. It's not your company. Well, it is your company in a sense, but you didn't start it.
Yeah. Yeah.
How are you scratching that itch?
So there's a couple of bits to that. I mean, from my own personal perspective, I think in building out my story as a entrepreneur or as an executive, let's say,
Hmm.
this is a very nice chapter because you've gone from like 0 to 1 at Trustmatic.
Hmm.
Previous to that was like scaling from 3 million to 20 million at Innovatrix.
Hmm.
And now at Certain, you're in a company which is, post Series C, which comes with its own specific challenges and objectives and all that kind of stuff. And being a senior executive in that company
Hmm.
and being part of what we all hope and believe will be a very successful couple of years, is for me that kind of rounds off my own sort of bona fide in those spaces.
Hmm.
I'm not thinking too far beyond like the next couple of years.
Yeah.
I think it's like when you have a startup and they have their 5-year financial plan.
Yes. Yes. You're like, sure, sure.
I'm,
That's what
I'm
it's going to
focused
be.
on the next 12 months maybe. I can
Yeah.
see
Yeah. Yeah.
there, like that's kind of where I am now. I'm really bought into what we're doing at Certain, and I'm not just saying that. Like I really am. I really believe in the company. I believe we can be a global tech player,
Yeah.
a significant one. Yeah, entrepreneurial itch. I am very entrepreneurial, but I'm also very careful because my job at Certain requires my full attention, which it has. I do have a couple of like, not a couple, one at the moment. It's a business that I own,
Hmm.
but I have a professional management team in place. I do like a bi-weekly sort of call and that kind of stuff. But I think you can't be a senior executive in a global company and have any significant effort divided into something else.
Right, right. So you're like, it's also a good, I guess, skill to sharpen, like
Yeah,
seeing operating at scale.
yeah,
Um, are you like, so you're liking it, which again, it depends on the entrepreneur. I found that some entrepreneurs like, it's like oil and water. They
yeah.
don't, they're like, I can't be told what to do. I'm used to having my own thing. Do you think that like the length of time that Trustmatic existed had something to do with it, that you didn't build a 5,000 person company and it was small enough and nimble enough that you could sort of insert yourself in the team and operate collectively?
Yeah, I think so. And to be fair, like I operate with a very healthy degree of autonomy at certain,
Hmm.
and all I get is support from above rather than direction and instructions and all
Right,
that kind of
right,
stuff.
right, 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 right.
So no, I consider myself still a founder, an owner, an entrepreneur, even though I'm working as an executive in a company I don't technically own. The
Right.
mindset never changes, right? So whatever you're doing, whatever job, if I went to work at Microsoft in 3 years, I would still have the same mindset that I have today, in that whatever my little part of this business is, like I own that.
Yes.
And of course, in Microsoft, you probably get more top-down instruction, but that's just a theoretical. Yeah,
Yes, exactly.
yeah,
So two more questions, then we're done. One is you know, looking in the future direction, like, you know, inevitably at some point during your career, I imagine you'll start another thing. I don't know
yeah,
if that's 20 years from now or 50 years, whatever the number is. And obviously market conditions matter. Obviously you'll not be, living in a 1 bedroom apartment, single, whatever, like the conditions will be different. Um, Doing it again, how would you think, what like, and also the conditions are different. Like even 3 or 4 years ago, there was no AI. I mean, there was no code,
yeah,
but there's, AI tools that make coding easier. There's things like Apollo that make go to market super easy.
yeah.
Like, is it like I'm just going to lean on my subject matter expertise for the rest of my life and do things in that space? Or what would you do going forward that would be different? Or would you do exactly the same playbook?
Definitely not the exact same playbook, because I'm married with a 2.5-year-old now. Obviously,
Yes.
got my 14-year-old son who lives in Ireland. Life is very different than at the time I founded Trustmatic,
Hmm.
and frankly, my wife has been amazing in terms of her support.
Hmm.
But running a startup is detrimental to your family life, as I'm sure a lot of people can relate to. I definitely wouldn't go down, the same route where like you're literally minimum 16 hours a day in an office until 4 a.m.
Yes.
grinding on stuff that's not even moving the needle. Like it gets to be a dark place. So I wouldn't do it. I wouldn't put my family through that again.
Hmm.
I haven't thought in too much detail about what the next startup would look like, except
Yeah.
I've got something running on the side. If it's in 5 years or 8 years, like the world will be so different at that point that any ideas I have now would be completely irrelevant then. However, one of the things you know, in terms of where I am in my life or where I'll be then, like boring businesses are interesting, right?
Yes.
Buying up and rolling up boring businesses into like a sort of very mini private equity model, that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
And also businesses that are like really simple tools which are highly automated. So there's this trend of solopreneurs,
Yes.
which require one person to run and requires like 4 hours a day at a max, and
Yes.
just generates cash. Like that's interesting as well. I read about these things, but that will all change by the time I'm actually launching a startup venture the next time around.
Yeah, I think I meant less what you will do, more how you'll do it. And it's funny because the pattern is always, you know, successful an entrepreneur hits that successful part. So you've sold a thing, you have enough money that it's like you're not like hand to mouth anymore. So you have a
Yeah,
little bit of oxygen. And then you're like, two things happen. I've found that tech entrepreneurs tend to want to do a physical thing, like a thing.
yeah,
Like I
yeah,
want to start a coffee shop or something because I want to see the fruits of my labor.
yeah,
And hey, like just this very simple money in, slightly more money comes out, like that kind of thing.
yeah,
And then the other thing is they're like, it's like, but you've made it. So
yeah.
like it's the advice you often hear from venture backed companies is, well, I wouldn't do that again.
yeah,
venture back founders, I should say. And I'm like, yeah, but you're rich. Not you, but one is
yeah,
rich. So it's really
yeah,
easy to have that advice. So how would you look at it going forward? I'm not poo-pooing your success. I'm just thinking
yeah.
like, what would you do differently given you have a little bit more oxygen to do what you want? Is
Totally,
it,
yeah. I mean, looking back, I would have, there's things you can say, there's things that would have changed, but I'm actually very happy with how things panned out. Right?
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah.
I, I definitely would, you know, you have the oxygen, as you said. One of my stated goals, and I'm quite open about this, is whenever this journey at certain comes to whatever type of end it comes at, and whatever that may be, like I'm taking at least 6 months off. Right? I'm spending
Yeah.
time with my family, and I mean that seriously. I'm
Mhm.
regenerating. Putting more focus on my health, like getting myself into a good space to be ready for the next thing. That's like
Mhm.
the first thing. I think
Mhm.
the worst thing you can do is jump from one pretty intense journey into
Yes.
starting another one. And after that, like, yeah, I'm frankly, I don't know if I've got the energy levels or if I'm in the right life position to be grinding from 0 to 1 again. Certainly not in the short term.
Do you think you need to? Do you think at this point you need to be that way
Yeah,
in the
true.
universe?
Like, yeah, I mean, I can self fund, right? I can
Yes.
self fund stuff. I don't put pressure on myself to be at scale within 18 months. I can raise much easier than I could in the first. So yes, if I was running a startup proper in the future, the journey would be much easier. I've dozens, if not hundreds, of lessons that I've learned that I
Mhm.
won't make those mistakes again.
Mhm.
It's just a case of like timing and is it the right thing, and where things are with family and all that kind of stuff.
All right.
It's
Well, we're
really
gonna.
difficult to predict or to
Of
even
course,
put
yeah,
forward.
no, totally. And I think I've run companies where people have too much money, and that's a whole other problem. So we'll come back to you. The one last thing I want to ask you is: so you're buying a soccer team, football team.
You've been reading the Irish media.
I'm just curious.
No, no. Yeah, I actually put out a statement recently on this topic. So my hometown team, Dundalk, who I've supported since I was 4 years old, who I was privileged to play for a number of years, um, they went through some ownership issues. So they've had American owners, then local owners, then another American owner. And a couple of weeks ago, that American owner said there was 24 hours until he was liquidating the club unless somebody took it off his hands. So I stepped forward. I said that I was interested in taking it over, with the idea being bringing in a couple of people I know who invest in that space
Hmm.
and sort of handing it over, but taking the club on a short term basis until to save it from going to liquidation that day,
Yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
then getting people in who could actually run it. Now, my bid was not the one that was chosen by the previous owner. So there's a new
Hmm.
guy who owns the club, seems to have a vision for how he wants to run it.
Hmm.
I'm supporting a fan group which is aiming to raise money and be in a position to step in should similar financial trouble happen in the future. But
Yes,
as of today, no, I'm not in the running to buy the football club. If I had have bought it, I wouldn't have been running it. It was just to be in a
sure.
position to save a 119-year-old club from going out of business.
Yeah,
That was
yeah,
the
totally,
only
totally.
the only objective there.
Well, I am looking forward to the Netflix special when it does come out of the next one.
Yeah,
But that's super cool. That's really interesting. Like you've had a very interesting life so far, and you're only 21. It's amazing.
yeah. Well, 21 plus tax plus Canadian tax, because Canadian tax is much
Oh
higher
God,
than it
that's
is here in
terrible. You're
Europe. So
59
yeah.
years old. I'm sorry. Well, Donald, thank you for spending so much time with us today. Really appreciate it, and we're looking forward to checking in with you in the next little while.
Thanks a million, Rob. Really appreciate the invite.
Thank you. Thanks for watching. Keep building, and see you next time on Decelerator.